Welcome to Vialet Studio, where Vialet and her guests share stories of their passions, inspirations, and spiritual journeys. Vialet creates a sacred and fun space for individuals to be able to share information about themselves, their work, and their community. We are so happy you have joined us today. Let's get started with your host, the magical creator of Discover Your Spiritual Gifts, Vialet. Vialet Rayne.
Hi, welcome to Vialet Studio. I'm so excited today. I have one of our local folks here, Miss Laurie, and how we connected through her was through Awkwardly Zen. Miss Airy, that is the founder of that, kind of connected us with her. And so I'm really excited to dive in and learn more about her and what she's going to offer. She's going to be at our fair here on October the 2nd, providing readings and meeting with people. So I'm excited to have that. Laurie, welcome.
Thank you.
To the show. And I found while we were talking beforehand, she lives really close to the center. So we got to get her out a little bit more, right?
Yes.
Miss Laurie, talk to us a little bit about your spiritual journey. I mean, all of us have had our own personal journeys.
Sure.
What got you to what you do today? And how did spirit lead you along? Because I know they're really good at that.
They are. I'm old, and so it happened many years ago. My first job after school, I was talking with a woman I worked with at a mental health center in Kentucky, of all places, and she suggested to me that I might want to read the Seth books. And so I'd never heard of those. And I was like, okay. And she posed a question to me in that moment. She said, what if everything that's happened to you up until this point and going forward isn't just happening to you, but it's something that you've created and that you planned ahead of time? And when she said that, this door opened in my brain, and I was like, oh, it made so much sense and it felt so familiar. And as soon as I started reading the Seth materials and all the books that Jane Roberts wrote as Seth, it's what opened the door for me, and spirit came flooding in, and all the things that I sort of thought I knew or had felt but didn't quite know what that was all started to fall into place and make sense. It was like I wasn't learning something, I was remembering something, was how it felt to me. I've always called this woman my door opener, because she really opened that door and sort of nudged me through it. And it's I feel like my path started there and has been moving forward ever since.
I love that, remembering instead of learning, remembering what's happening. And, that's so true. The outside world around us wants us to believe so many different things. And when you step on your spiritual path, you begin to question everything. I think that's when you really start to ask those big questions, right?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I was raised in Protestant churches and was very active. And so it was a challenge for me at the early stages to somehow try to reconcile those two things. And then I read Edgar Cayce, and he was talking about, it was a book on reincarnation. And he was able to reconcile that for me and talked about passages in the Bible and what his belief was about that, or what his understanding was about what they were saying. And again, kind of opened another door and helped me make that bridge at that point in my life that I needed to make so that I could continue to move forward on this spiritual path. So I've had a lot of door openings and awakenings, I think, as I've moved forward. And they continue to happen, but these were major ones that I know helped move me forward at that time in my life.
Well, I love that, because a lot of people have had a religious background. As they step into this, they really struggle with that balance. And I do think the key is spirit, asking spirit the questions. How do I make sense to this? What happens with this? And they always provide us with the right answers if we're open to listen, right?
Exactly. Always. Yeah. And answers I don't usually expect.
Right?
Yeah.
That's when you really know, oh, I didn't think that came from somewhere else, because I would have never come up with that answer, right?
Right. Exactly.
Those are
Yeah.
powerful answers to receive. So, what is it that you do today? Because I know you offer some really cool stuff as a practitioner. So, share with us a little bit about what you do today and how you got to that point.
Okay. Well, currently I offer what I call soul path readings. And that I finally decided that's what I was doing after I read a book, I don't know, in the mid to late 90s by Dr. Michael Newton on Journey of the Soul. And he talks about that. He regressed people to that soul place, and they would meet with this group of beings who helped them plan each lifetime. And as I read through that, it occurred to me that that's the information I was getting for people. I wasn't getting like, is this the right guy for me? Is this my job? Where am I going to move? I didn't get that kind of information. I always was receiving these information about soul path, and I didn't know what to call it until then. So I decided that's what I think this must be. And Spirit agreed. They were like, yes, this is what you're doing. So now when I meet with someone, we sit down and I invite their soul council to step forward and begin to talk with them. And as much as I'm able as a human, I put my mind and ego aside and just let the soul council speak through me and talk directly to the person and answer their questions. As part of that, a lot of times it'll be a balance between the council will start and giving them information about their path, why they're here, what their soul wants to accomplish, what gifts did they bring in for this lifetime, what their soul decided. And then sometimes guides will come through. The random family member sometimes will pop through. I never know for sure once we're going who else might come through, but we always start with the soul council, who kind of lays the groundwork and says, this is who you are, this is why you came, here are the past lives that are relevant, that you're bringing these gifts in from these lives. So it starts there, and then we just go with whoever shows up and whatever questions they have as we move along.
Well, and I would assume that a lot of healing occurs in that process.
I think it can, absolutely, yes.
Just the awareness of, oh, that's why this is happening. That's why these things are occurring. This is why this is happening, right?
Yes. I think it opens the doors for them and opens their mind a bit to, there's so much more than they thought they were, that we are these divine beings, these souls that are always connected to source, that there's really no separation. And counsel usually really emphasizes that really you have no separation. You are a divine being in this physical body. And I think for a lot of folks that really expands them, because I don't know that we necessarily think about our souls all that much. It's a nice concept, but I know even for myself, it took some work for me to really get acquainted with that soul aspect of myself and really relate to that, as that's who I am, not this necessarily, but this soul, this eternal being. So I think it helps heal, and it helps open the mind and expand their possibilities.
Do you think we ever get off path? Do we steer off course?
I feel like I do all the time, and yet Spirit will say, no, that's okay. It's slightly askew, but it's okay. It's a path. You'll learn different things, and you'll learn stuff, and you'll get to where you need to be. My guides used to always say to me, they used to tease me and say, well, you need to be from here to here. And we know it's easy to go from point A to point B, but we know you're going to take the scenic route. So we'll be here waiting when you get here. Because they knew I had to do it my way, which was sometimes the harder, more struggle way. And so I would struggle through, and I'd finally get there, and they'd be like, well, how was that for you? So I don't know if the scheme of things we're really, truly ever off of our path, because I think it just adapts, and we keep moving, and we get guided gently by our soul and whoever's with us to come back to whatever we're needing to accomplish.
I find that as well. I always tell people you can take the short route or you can take the long route. And I
Exactly.
have found with the long route, it's more painful. It's a little bit more, it has more boulders, more obstacles.
Mhm.
It's not as gentle, as easy as we want it to be, but they'll stand there while you bang your head on the wall.
Yes.
They'll wait patiently until you get done fighting with yourself. Then
Yes.
they'll hold loving space for you as you do that. As you go, no, I do not want to do that. And they're like, okay. And you'll
Right.
put your head, and eventually you'll be like, okay, I surrender. I give up. Let's do this thing. Let's do this dance.
Yep.
Have you had clients that come to you that this lifetime has been very difficult, that have
Mhm.
a hard time understanding the choices that they may have choose in the direction? Can you
Mhm.
share with us a little bit some of your experiences with that, and how do you help them? How do you reach them?
There are folks that come and have had horrible lives, and the idea that somehow they chose some of this and that they arranged these things to happen is a hard thing to sit with sometimes. So I know that spirit um, guides them gently towards some of that information, says it in a way that they can come to it and understand it. They also will utilize my skill as a mental health professional for many years to also help them to begin to understand and have some insight into their behavior and help them with their understanding of perhaps why this path has been so difficult. So it can be a challenge, and some people struggle with that and maybe don't quite connect at right at first. That's why I always record my sessions, because my feeling is sometimes somebody has to have a reading, not really settle with it, and then maybe a few weeks or months later, they re-listen to it, and then it starts to click because little seeds have been planted for them to start to understand what spirit was saying to them and how they can start to see that, okay, I understand. And for me personally, it's really been about moving out of victim mentality into understanding that I have some choices to make and that I've chosen certain things, and that puts a whole other spin on it for me. I'm not a victim. I'm really co-creating as I move through life and trying to help clients understand that as well.
I love that. I love that. But we also, all of us, talk about you have free will. So here's this question of,
Yeah.
you have free will, but yet you're telling me I made choices before I came here. But why do I have free will if I've already made choices? So I've heard these questions. So I would love to hear your answer to that. That I'm sure you've been asked that too, as well.
And I ask it constantly to spirit. It's like, seriously, I have free will. Are you kidding? Uh, but I do. And what they always say to me is, they remind me that yes, you plan all this out. You have this blueprint of how you want things to go, generally speaking. Then you get born into this body, and of course, your soul promptly forgets everything because I'm sure it's a real shock to be in a physical body. And so the soul then is constantly trying to wake up and figure it out and remember who it is and what it's doing. In the meantime, human beings were designed with this idea of free will where we can make our own choices. So humans always have the choice and the right to override whatever the soul decided ahead of time and make a different choice. Ideally, we all at some point connect enough with our soul self and the soul wakes up enough that free will and the soul's choice kind of coincide and we're able to move smoothly on a path. But I think it kind of comes and goes because we always have free will and we can make choices that maybe the soul's like, you're doing what? And we're like, yeah, I'm doing this. And they're like, okay. And then we stumble along and then somewhere we sort of match up again. And like you say, surrender. And then we move forward again and somehow stumble onto that path that maybe is the one that the soul kind of wanted to follow in the first place.
I love that explanation. I tell people that as we become more enlightened, as we step into our
Mhm.
divinity of who we are, free will doesn't matter anymore, right? Because you're aligned with your soul purpose and your
Exactly.
purpose. And then free will, who cares about free will? I want to do what my soul has set me up to do, because that's part of my growth and my
Mhm.
spiritual evolution. And this battle that we have sometimes, which is part of this human experience, right?
Yeah.
Um, Makes life a little harder when I've learned, and I fought them on choices, but
Oh
I've
yeah.
to go, okay, I surrender. Because if I had my choice today, I would live in Florida on the beach. That's
Ah.
what it would be. And they kept bringing me back to Colorado, and I kept coming kicking and screaming because I didn't want to live in Colorado. To this day, if I had my choice and I could create my perfect world, I'd move my children to Florida, and I would live Florida on the beach and have my family around me. That's my perfect dream. But reality doesn't always give us exactly what that looks like, right? Uh,
Right. But I think you're right. I think when we're in alignment and we're following guidance, we're really allowing our soul to help guide us, and our guides or whoever to really guide us in this life, and have really said, okay, I surrender, I'm going to do it this way, and listen to spirit. Then for me personally, that's where my free will is making that choice every day to do that. And so in the in some ways it is a free will choice, and I'm making it every day, knowing that at any moment I could say, yeah, I'm done with that, I'm going to do it this way, and I keep choosing not to most of the time. but but then it's really staying in that alignment and working with spirit, because it's so much sweeter to do it that way.
it is, and it's so fulfilling when we follow that path,
It
right?
is. It
It's
truly is.
it's really kind of a beautiful alignment, and we miss that if we're not really careful. Um,
Yeah.
I do Akashic record readings, and so I always look at soul contracts within
Uh-huh.
relationships, right? Um, what have you found when you went to the council? Have you asked questions about relationship contracts in this lifetime? And what have you found through your experiences through those?
You know, w- when I talk with when counsel is talking with someone, they don't, for me personally, they don't usually speak in terms of contracts and um, those those specific kinds of ways of looking at relationships. They're more likely to relate it. It may be using different language, but they will relate it more to, okay, you're in this relationship because of this particular past life, and they call it karmic patterns. And these are the karmic patterns that you're here to stop and to move away from and resolve for this lifetime, so you don't keep repeating them. So that's the languaging they use. If someone has a really tough contract or attachments, cords that are going to different people that no longer function, I usually refer them to other folks like you or Jason Antelek to do that work, because I feel like that's not my area of expertise at this point. And so I want them to go to someone that I know will help them clear that. But for me, the council tends to talk more about karmic patterns and breaking those.
And so, what is your understanding of karma and karmic patterns? Because everybody has a different viewpoint. But
Yeah.
if you go out and read about karma and karmic patterns, everybody has different ideas and viewpoints. They're kind of all over the board. So, I'd love to hear kind of what your viewpoint or what you have found.
What I've come to understand through doing these readings and just for myself, karmic patterns are those behaviors that we bring through every lifetime. They're almost unconscious. So we get involved with certain kinds of people and repeat the patterns in every relationship. And so you might have 5 husbands, but they're all the same, and the relationship is all the same, because if you haven't stopped to look at those sort of unconscious patterns, then you just keep repeating them and hoping the outcome will be different. So when Spirit is talking with folks, they encourage folks to pay attention to that. They'll help them point out the patterns, or they'll suggest that they work with someone or within themselves in meditation to begin to identify those patterns that don't work out. An example of this, I worked with someone years ago, and she and her husband had been married many years, but were pretty awful together. And she said, we're getting a divorce. And I'm like, oh, okay. She goes, it's a good thing. She said, we figured out that karmically we've been around many, many times, and that generally every lifetime, one of us ends up killing the other one. And she said, in this lifetime, we're choosing not to do that, but to divorce and go our separate ways so that we don't kill each other. And I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense. So in that sense, she was breaking that karmic pattern so that she and her husband never had to come back, probably even interact with each other anymore if they didn't want to, and certainly broke that pattern of killing one another, which is probably a good thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I love that. And it is, somebody, and we've all seen it, right? We've had that best friend that's in this relationship, get divorced, or they break up, and then they attract the same type of relationship with a different person.
Right.
Because they're continually bringing that in. And at some point you got to reflect and go, okay, I'm doing this. So what am I doing?
Well, and part of it for me too is in my own relationships is realizing that the other person is a perfect mirror. And that's what we are for each other. And that's part of that karmic reflection. Is there a perfect mirror for me to see myself? A lot of times in ways I don't like, but they're reflecting back in their behavior toward me what it is in me that I need to look at. In mental health and psychology terms, they would call it shadow work, where you sit and you look at those unconscious parts of yourself and you realize that's what drives those behaviors because we're not aware of them. So when you're in those relationships, then you have the opportunity to see those behaviors quite plainly. And then you have the opportunity to stop and realize, yes, it's me doing this, and how do I shift it? So it's really helpful if we can stop. I mean, people think karma is really bad. I'm starting to think maybe not, because it's how we grow. By looking at that and getting that information conscious, then we can make changes. And people change completely when they do that.
Do you see addictive behaviors in the same way, where they're connected to past lives? Have you seen that in your work? How addictions, because those are patterns and cycles as well.
Absolutely. Now that you say that, I haven't worked directly with that in the readings so much. It really hasn't come up. But having worked in addiction services for many years, that makes total sense. Now that you ask that, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. That it's a way of coping, and they've probably brought some of that through many lifetimes. And now they're at a point where they have the opportunity to look at it and change it. And I think those that get into recovery do that in whatever way they choose to do that. I'll have to think about that. That's a nice way to look at that.
Because, I love the book, The Soul Journey, right?
Mhm.
But he was really evaluating all these readings that come through, which I think all of us at readers do. There's patterns with them. And you're like, oh, okay. I see the patterns of what's happening. I see kind of what's coming through. And we learn as readers the more that we work with people, right? Oh, that's what that's about. Oh, I get that. Right.
I was just thinking that it's like, yes, sometimes the readings, it's like, is it for them or is it for me? It's like some of the information coming through, it's like, oh, thank you. Okay, I needed to hear that too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but sometimes I see in my clients patterns, like similar patterns or similar things coming through with multiple people. And I'm like, oh, okay. Is this for me, or is it, am I we all look at, hey, what's coming through. So I love that. So do people come back and get a second reading? Is there a benefit doing it more than once?
Yeah, I have folks that do come back. I encourage them to not come back real soon because I feel like the information they get is usually pretty dense. And it's like sit with it for a while, work with it, meditate. And honestly, the guides are like meditate, meditate, meditate more. So that's kind of an ongoing theme. But yes, people do come back, usually, maybe once a year, once every 6 months, sometimes sooner. They do come back. And it's interesting just to watch their progress when they do that, to see what information they've taken from our last reading and how they've used that, and then where they're getting stuck, and see what their counsel is telling them. Sometimes folks haven't really worked much with it, and so the counsel basically repeats itself and says, here's what we said before, here's what we're saying again, and here's why. And they just coax them along and say, this is what you might want to look at. They're always kind and gentle and supportive, where I might not have been as gentle and kind if it was just me saying it.
They love us unconditionally, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
They really do. So with the guides that show up in the readings, are these guides that have been with them a long time? Are they guides that are there for a specific time period to help with something specific? Have you seen patterns within the guides? Or are they just bringing messages?
It's all of that. So yes, I have, a majority of folks, they will have at least one guide that's been with them throughout this entire lifetime, sometimes other lifetimes as well, and know them very, very well. Others have guides that are here for a very specific purpose for a very short period of time. And usually they will step into a reading and let the person know that I'm here, this is why, and I want to work with you. So meditate so we can talk, so they'll do that. I've had some whose family members have come as their guides as well and are watching over them and working with them and helping to guide them through their life. So it really, there's a whole range, I think, of how guides appear and how they come and go. And some are with them forever, some come for that brief time. It kind of runs the gamut, I find.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, your readings sound fascinating. I may have to schedule a time to come to you.
That would be fun. Although I'm not sure you really need it, but yeah, that would be really fun to see what your counsel has to say to you.
It's always kind of fun because, when you're a reader and you do some of this, we tend to come with tougher questions because some of the basics we kind of understand. So we're into the big answers. It's like, okay, I get what blah, 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 but what about this? And what about this? And
right.
Tell me about this. And so they're like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we need confirmation sometimes of what we already know.
Absolutely. And I get readings, fairly frequently from friends and people that I know who do this work, because yes, it's confirmation for me. And when I get stuck and I'm struggling with something in my own life, and for whatever reason, I'm just not wanting to hear my guides tell me, suggest what, or I'm hearing them, but I'm like, yeah, I don't want to hear that. Then I will ask someone. And of course they, smack me in the head, but that's okay. Because then at least and my guides are so funny. They'll say, we understand you need to hear it from a physical being telling you this, because then somehow in my brain, it's real than if I just hear it from my non-physical friends. So they understand, they don't get offended. They just come through whoever and tell me the same thing. And then I'm just laughing and saying, okay, yes, I get it now.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Laurie, if somebody wanted to connect with you and find you, what's the easiest place for them to go and connect and find you?
Probably the easiest way to get with me would be to email me. It's myspiritualsojourn@gmail.com is the easiest way.
Cool. All
yeah.
Right.
I do have a website, and you can certainly visit that. It's spiritualsojourn-center.com. So just visit the website. It kind of gives you some basic information about me and what I do. But email is probably the easiest way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time today to hang out with me. I know originally on the Zoom link, it said like 3 a.m. and I agree with both not going to be there at 3 a.m.
Probably not.
Sleepy. But thank you for being on the show. And I look so forward to having you at the Center for our fair.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so excited to be there as well and to be one of your readers. I'm very honored. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thank you for watching today. I hope to see you at Discover Your Spiritual Gifts very soon.
Thank you for joining us. To find out more about Vialet and how she can help you discover your spiritual gifts, head over to discoveryourspiritualgifts.com and on YouTube at Discover Your Spiritual Gifts. You can also send a personal message to Vialet through email, violet@discoveryourspiritualgifts.com. Until next time, remember, we are meant to have abundant and joyful lives. We hope to see you really soon at Discover Your Spiritual Gifts.
Discover connection, awaken sacredness, become empowered. Come experience a difference at Discover Your Spiritual Gifts.